Love is sacrifice. You got to give up something to gain something. You've got to shrink to expand. So, what am I talking about in this video? I'm talking about a concept that was shared with me by my middle son, Joel. He was over at the house yesterday, and he's sharing this fascinating concept. It has to do with the fact that sacrifice is necessary if we are to have a relationship with others. It turns out that God, in his infinite expansiveness, fills everything. And when he decided to create the universe, it's almost like he had to find a place to put it. Like he had to create space for it because, of course, he filled everything as it was, and so in a sense, um, there was a need for him to kind of withdraw from part of space in order to have a place to put the universe. It's kind of an interesting thought, and the idea goes back to the 16th century when a mystic, Rabbi Isaac Luria, Luria, came up with a concept, and it was documented by in a Kabbalistic text, Etz Chaim, by his disciple, who's a guy, Rabbi Chaim Vital. I'm probably not saying the name right. But the word is Tzimtzum, Tzim, Tzum. And it's a Hebrew word that literally means constriction, contraction, or withdrawal, retreat. It can also mean limitation or concentration. And the doctrine proposes that God had to begin the process of creation by limiting his infinite light to allow for a conceptual space in which the finite realms could exist. I know it's a little mind-boggling, but this primordial initial contraction formed sort of a vacant space into which a new creative light could beam. It's almost like he had to have a canvas um, to paint the creation on, but had to be somewhat distinct from him because in the Kabbalistic interpretation, the Kabbalah is a esoteric or um, sort of a, what's the word, mystic interpretation of the Hebrew text, but Tzimtzum gives rise to the paradox that we experience on the planet, which is both the divine presence and the divine absence. Although God is in all, we experience his absence in moments in our lives when he seems nowhere to be found. So there's this, it's like there's a vacuum and it's also full of light. So in a very real way, to love well, we have to sacrifice our own expansiveness, our own independence. We have to give up our self-serving, humble ourselves, and get beyond, stretch beyond our own needs and agendas to embrace the needs and desires of another human being. Now, this was a problem for me personally when I was considering marriage because I realized that when I was single, I had the ability to interact with others in a way that would be pleasing, that would be reciprocal, that I could in some way control the outcome. I made it my aim to be pleasing and to make people happy, which was both a wonderful and a terrible thing. But I realized as I was dating Terry that I didn't have that control over her. She could say something that was not pleasing to someone, and I was powerless to stop it, and in some ways powerless to make it better because I couldn't modify her the way I modified my own approach. So it honestly it was a terrible thing, and part of what led me to break up with her was because I didn't know how to let go of that need for control, that need um, to to modify outcomes or to feel that I had full control. And I didn't know how I could possibly take the fall for someone else's actions when I could not control them. It seemed virtually impossible for me to to be comfortable letting someone bear my name, being fully committed and identified with them when I did not always even agree with what they did. But now I understand that this is exactly what God does with us. He lets us bear his name, even though we bear it deplorably in some cases and very pathetically in others. Um, but God is big enough to surrender that control and to allow us to be one with him without being controlled by him. It's quite amazing. But I understand now that loving another person actually does give them the power to hurt you, the power to misuse the trust you put in them or to misuse the information that they have. Um, I still find it baffling that God can stand to allow churches and individuals to carry his own name when their behavior is sometimes so hideous, so awful. It's just uh, beyond me that he could allow himself to be identified with human beings and institutions that are just so broken. Um, I know that I before marriage was deeply worried about my reputation, and I guess I was concerned about God's reputation as well. But I realized that if the life of Jesus shows us anything, it shows us that even perfection does not guarantee reception and honor. Um, People who are judgy will find a reason to judge, even when there's not much to judge. But in my case, thankfully, God broke through my fears, my pride, and my people pleasing enough to allow me to follow my own heart, to cross the threshold into married life, to ask Terry's hand in marriage, and then to say, I do, to surrender outcomes and to work through my insecurities so that I could take that next step in maturity, that step of being willing to ironically contract, to limit myself in order to extend myself to this person that I loved and who has been my wife for now more than 40 years. It's really, it's quite the paradox, isn't it? That it's by pulling back and like limiting ourselves that we can actually then make room in our hearts and in our lives for others. In fact, whenever we reach out to others in community, whenever I make time to meet with someone in my practice, I'm sacrificing something. I'm limiting my own freedom in order to create space, to embrace that possibility of connection, and to then be able to allow that constriction to help me to expand in the world. Because if I can, in that pulling back into that limited time and space that I share with a person, if I can impart something to them that they receive, then that part of me goes out into the world to make a difference for good and for God. Such a cool thing. One other thought I had about this idea of pulling back or the contracting of the self has to do with our quiet time or meditation. That this contraction, this limitation, is part of what makes meditation and quiet time so powerful. Because as we set aside, as we surrender our own agenda, we limit our own thought life, our feelings, our movement, our activity, then we create this vacuum, this emptiness into which we invite the presence of God. It's such a cool thing. And fasting, again, is another thing that may be very much akin to this idea of Tzimtzum, where you voluntarily limit yourself to create space for something to come forth, to be born into that space. So it's just after Christmas, and I love the Christmas Carol, "Joy to the World." And one of the beautiful lines in this ancient carol is, "Let every heart prepare him room." There wasn't room in the inn that night, but a lowly stable was a place for Jesus to be born. And if we'll make our hearts available, if we'll create space and set aside our own hubbub, hustle and bustle and hubbub of life, that we can be still, then Jesus can be born afresh day by day into our lives. So I hope this has been helpful. I obviously, for those of you who actually understand Tzimtzum and the idea of withdrawal or limitation that God led the way in doing in creation, I'm sure you're probably wishing to correct me. And feel free to comment. I hopefully will learn more about this. I just found out about it yesterday, so I'm a newbie, but it seemed fascinating, and I just wanted to share my thoughts with you. Hope you find them helpful. Plenty of other videos on my YouTube channel. I'd love you to check them out. Please like this one if you like it. Subscribe and comment below. If there are videos that you'd like for me to do, let me know. I love you.